Hey guys, tonight we're scaling the dizzying heights of medieval castles, those stone giants looming over misty valleys, their turrets slicing through the clouds like something out of a fantasy epic. Picture yourself trudging up a rocky hill, the wind whistling past your boots, slipping on damp moss as a fortress glares down at you, daring you to try anything foolish. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. If you're an invader, those castles were built to make you regret even showing up. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're chilling as we dive into this. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the base of a craggy hill, staring up at a medieval castle that looks like it's daring gravity to pull it down. Why are these fortresses always built so high? It's not just because they look cool, though let's be honest, they totally do. The answer starts with strategy, the kind of cold, calculated thinking that kept kings alive and enemies at bay. Castles perched on hills weren't just homes for fancy lords. They were military machines designed to give defenders every possible edge. Height meant you could see trouble coming from miles away. Imagine you're a sentry squinting into the horizon, spotting a glint of armor, or a puff of dust, long before the enemy's close enough to lob a rock. That early warning. It's the difference between rallying your archers or waking up to a battering ram at your gate. Let's get real. Medieval warfare was no joke. Armies didn't mess around. And a castle's job was to make attacking it a nightmare. A mainstream fact, here historians agree, that elevated positions gave defenders a massive advantage in spotting and repelling invasions. The higher you are, the farther you see, and the more time you have to prepare. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some castles like Chateau in France were built so high that workers reportedly hauled stones up cliffs using ropes and sheer stubbornness, occasionally losing a few to the abyss below. Talk about a bad day at work. Historians still argue whether these extreme heights were always worth the cost. Did the extra elevation justify the insane effort, or were some lords just flexing their power? Now picture yourself as an attacker. You're already exhausted from marching in clunky armor, and now you've got to climb a steep hill while arrows rain down like a bad weather forecast. The slope's a killer, literally. Defenders could roll logs or chuck boiling oil. Okay, maybe not always oil. That's a bit of Hollywood flair, but hot sand was legit. The height amplifies every move the defenders make. Your ladder's too short. Tough luck. Your siege tower's stuck in the mud. Should have checked the terrain, buddy. The castle's altitude isn't just a flex. It's a psychological gut punch making you question your life choices before you even reach the walls. But it's not all about fighting. Height also meant control. You're a lord, and your castle's up there lording over the valley like a stone CEO. Villages below look tiny, their smoke trails curling up like offerings to your power. From up high, you can monitor trade routes, tax travelers, and keep an eye on pesky neighbors plotting rebellion. It's like having the ultimate corner office, except with chainmail and fewer coffee breaks. And let's not forget, the practical side high ground often meant better access to clean water sources like springs, which will circle back to when we talk rivers later. For a quick laugh, imagine a lord trying to impress a rival by bragging about his castle's altitude like it's showing off a new phone. Oh, you're at 500 meters. I'm at 600 peasant. As you catch your breath, peering up at those towering walls, you start to get it. Height wasn't just a perk, it was the whole game. Castles were built high because up was safe, up was strong, up meant you were the boss. But what about those rivers curling around the base like protective snakes? That's where things get even trickier for invaders, and we're about to wade into that next. You're still catching your breath from that imaginary climb. Up the castle's hill, the wind tugging at your cloak as you squint down, at the landscape below. Remember that fortress glaring at you from its lofty perch. Now your eyes catch something else glinting in the distance, a ribbon of water winding around the castle's base like a loyal guard dog. Rivers weren't just pretty scenery for medieval castles. They were nature's own security system, turning these fortresses into nightmares for anyone dumb enough to attack. You're about to wade into why those shimmering waterways were as crucial as the castle's height, making invaders wish they'd stayed home with a nice cup of mead. Picture yourself as that poor sap leading an army toward the castle. You've survived the uphill slog, dodging arrows, and maybe a rogue boulder or two, only to find a river blocking your path. It's not just a trickle, it's wide deep, and probably freezing because medieval rivers didn't mess around. This is your first taste of why castles were often built with rivers as their best buddies. The water acts like a natural moat, a liquid wall that laughs at your siege plans. You want to cross? Good luck. Your horses are spooked, your men are soaked, and your fancy siege equipment is sinking faster than your morale. A mainstream historical fact backs this up. Rivers were deliberately chosen as defensive barriers, often more effective than man-made moats, because they were harder to drain or bridge under arrow fire. But here's a quirky tidbit. To chew on some castles, like the one at Stirling in Scotland, used nearby rivers, not just for defense, but to mess with invaders' heads. Locals would spread rumors about treacherous currents or mythical water beasts, think Loch Ness monsters, grumpy cousin, to scare off superstitious soldiers. Historians still argue whether these tales were pure psychological warfare or if some lords genuinely believed in river-dwelling nasties. Either way, you're standing there staring at the churning water, wondering if it's worth risking your neck, or if maybe you should have signed up for knitting instead. Let's break it down. You're an attacker, and this river's not just a barrier, it's a logistical disaster. Medieval armies didn't exactly carry inflatable rafts. Building a bridge under enemy fire, that's a death wish. You could try fording the river, but the current's strong, and the defenders up on that hill you just climbed are pelting you with arrows. Plus, rivers often meant muddy banks, perfect for trapping your heavy carts or tripping up your knights in their clunky armor. It's like the castles saying, "Oh, you thought the hill was bad. Hold my ale." The river's depth and flow made it a dynamic defense, shifting with the seasons, but always ready to ruin an invader's day. Now flip the perspective. You're inside the castle, peering down from those high walls you were marveling at last time. The river's your best friend, not just because it stops enemies, but because it buys you time. While the attackers are floundering, you're stockpiling supplies, sharpening weapons, or maybe sneaking a quick nap, because who's got time for stress when the river's doing half the work? And here's a little joke for you. Imagine an invader, knee-deep in water, yelling at his troops, who forgot the floaties, while an archer up top takes aim. Not exactly a motivational speech. But rivers weren't just about defense. They were lifelines, and not just in the poetic sense. You're starting to notice how the castle's positioned not just high, but perfectly placed where the river bends like it's hugging the fortress. This wasn't random. Rivers meant fresh water for drinking, cooking, and keeping the castle stench to a minimum. Medieval hygiene was, let's say, a work in progress. They also powered mills for grinding grain, which kept the castle fed during a siege. Without that river, you're rationing stale bread and praying for rain. With it, you're practically running a medieval Airbnb with all the amenities. As you stand there, imagining the river's gentle gurgle, mixed with the distant curses of waterlogged invaders, you realize it's more than a moat. It's a partner in crime working with the castle's height to make this place untouchable. But the land itself, those hills and valleys, has more to say about why this castle's sitting pretty. You're about to explore how the terrain itself shaped these stone giants, and trust me, it's not just about looking good on a postcard. You're still lingering near that castle, the river's gentle lapping below, mixing with the wind, whistling through the high walls you've been eyeing. You've seen how the height gives defenders the upper hand, and how the river plays bouncer keeping invaders at bay. But now your gaze sweeps across the rugged landscape around you, the jagged hills, the twisting valleys, the way the earth itself seems to cradle this fortress. It's no accident this castle's perched where it is. The terrain isn't just a backdrop. It's a silent architect shaping every stone and tower. You're about to discover how the lay of the land dictated where and how these medieval strongholds were built, turning nature into a fortress' best ally. Imagine you're a medieval lord, scouting for the perfect spot to build your castle. You're not just looking for a nice view. Though let's be real, those sweeping vistas from a hilltop are Instagram-worthy, even without the filters. You need a place that screams, "Try me to your enemies." The terrain is your first partner in this game of survival. Hills, cliffs, and rocky outcrops are your friends because they make life miserable for attackers. A steep slope. That's nature's way of saying, "Keep climbing, loser." A narrow valley, perfect for funneling enemies into a kill zone where your archers can play target practice. A mainstream historical fact confirms this. Castles, like Edinburgh in Scotland, were built on volcanic crags because the natural rock formations added layers of defense no human could replicate. But here's a quirky tidbit to make you chuckle. Some builders got so obsessed with terrain that they'd pick spots so remote their own supply wagons struggled to reach them. Take Castell y Bear in Wales built on a rocky outcrop, so awkward that even the castle's own residents probably grumbled about the commute. Historians still argue whether these ultra-rugged locations were strategic genius or just lords showing off their "I can build anywhere" swagger. Either way, you're starting to see the method in the madness. The terrain wasn't just a stage. It was a co-star working with the castle's height and river to create a defensive masterpiece. Let's walk the land. You're trudging through a valley, the castle looming above like it's judging your cardio. The hill it sits on isn't just high, it's steep, uneven, and littered with boulders. Attackers would have hated this. Their heavy siege towers useless on this slope. Their battering rams. Good luck dragging those up a path barely fit for goats. The terrain forces invaders into predictable routes, like ants marching to a picnic right where the defenders want them. You can almost hear the castle's architect cackling. "Oh, you thought this would be easy. And here's a quick joke. Picture an invader slipping on a mossy rock, muttering, 'Whose idea was this hill?' while his buddies pretend they didn't hear." Now think about the castle itself. The terrain didn't just protect it. It shaped how it was built. You notice the walls aren't uniform, they hug the contours of the hill, zigzagging to match the natural ridges. This isn't lazy construction, it's brilliant. By following the land's curves, builders saved resources and made the walls harder to scale. Some castles, like those in the Rhine Valley, even used cliffs as natural walls, saving masons the trouble of hauling stones for half the fortress. You're starting to get why picking the right spot was half the battle literally. The terrain told builders where to place towers, how wide to dig the moat if they even needed one with that river you saw, and where to stick the gatehouse to maximize enemy misery. But it's not all about defense. You're noticing how the terrain also supports the castle's daily grind. That river you admired, it's fed by the valley's natural drainage, keeping the castle's wells full. The nearby forest tucked into the landscape supplies timber and game. Even the fields below, carved out of gentler slopes, grow crops to feed the castle's people. It's like the terrains running a medieval co-op, providing everything the castle needs to thrive. And here's another laugh for you. Imagine a lord surveying his perfect hilltop, only to realize his fancy new castle so high his servants keep passing out from the climb. Talk about a design flaw. As you stand there, taking in the way the castle melds with its surroundings, you realize the terrain's more than a foundation, it's a strategy. The hill's height, the rivers flow the valleys. Curves, they all work together, making this fortress a puzzle no invader wants to solve. But what happens when the enemy actually tries? You're about to find out. Because siege warfare is where this carefully chosen terrain really shows its teeth, and it's not pretty. You're still soaking in the view of that castle, its stones blending into the rugged hill like it grew straight out of the earth. You felt the power of its height, the river's protective embrace, and the terrain's clever design. But now the air shifts. There's a distant rumble of hooves, the clank of armor, and a dust cloud on the horizon. An enemy army's rolling in, and this castle's about to prove why it was built this way. You're not just a bystander anymore. You're caught in the chaos of a medieval siege where the hill river and walls turn into a brutal gauntlet for invaders. Buckle up, because siege warfare is about to show you just how nasty things get when someone tries to crack this fortress. Picture yourself as an attacker, your boots sinking into the muddy valley you trudged through last time. The castle's up there mocking you from its hilltop, and that river you cursed is still gurgling like it's in on the joke. Sieges weren't quick skirmishes. They were long, miserable slogs, and this castle's setup was designed to make you suffer. The height alone is a nightmare. You're hauling siege ladders, but the slope's so steep your men are sliding back faster than they climb. Archers, up-top rain arrows, and every step feels like a gamble with death. A mainstream historical fact drives this home sieges, like the one at Rochester Castle in 1215, showed how elevated positions let defenders hold out for months, wearing down attackers with sheer exhaustion. But here's a quirky tidbit. To lighten the mood, some besiegers got so desperate they tried bizarre tactics like catapulting dead animals over the walls to spread disease. Imagine being a defender, dodging arrows, only to see a rotting cow sailing your way. Gross, right? Historians still argue whether these biowarfare stunts were effective or just medieval temper tantrums. Either way, you're down here staring up at those walls, and the castle's height is only half your problem. The river's the other half, cutting off your supply lines and forcing you to split your army to guard any makeshift bridges. It's like the castle's playing chess while you're stuck playing checkers. Let's get gritty. You've got a battering ram, but good luck dragging it up that hill you hated last section. The terrain's uneven, and the defenders are rolling logs or dropping rocks, turning your ram into firewood. Siege towers. They're too heavy for the slope, and the riverbanks too soft to support them. You could try tunneling under the walls. Medieval sappers loved that trick. But the rocky ground you noticed earlier makes digging a nightmare, and the river might flood your tunnel anyway. It's like the castle's laughing at your every move. Here's a joke for you. Imagine your siege engineer covered in mud muttering, "I told the boss we needed a bigger catapult," while a boulder whizzes past his head. Now flip to the defender's view. You're up on those high walls, the wind stinging your face, but you're grinning because the enemy's floundering. The hills doing half the work, every arrow you loose flies farther, every stone you drop hits harder. The rivers keeping their supplies at bay, so they're rationing food while you're munching on bread from that mill you saw. Sieges were as much about starvation as storming, and this castle setup lets you outlast the enemy. You can almost hear the attackers' stomachs growling from here. But it's not all easy sieges or grim for everyone. You're rationing, too praying the river doesn't dry up, and dodging the occasional flaming arrow that makes it over the walls. The real kicker, time's your enemy's enemy. You're watching the attackers camp out their fires, flickering in the valley, but winter's coming, or maybe dysentery, from that river water they're drinking. The castle's height and river make waiting them out a valid strategy. Some sieges, like at Kenilworth in 1266, lasted half a year because the defenders had the high ground and water to spare. And here's another laugh picture. An invader sick of the siege yelling, "I'm going home." Tell the king he can keep his stupid castle while his buddies nod in agreement. As the siege drags on, you realize this castle's no passive pile of stones. Its height, river, and terrain are active players turning every attack into a slog. The invaders are learning the hard way why this fortress was built where it is. But how did builders pull this off? You're about to peek behind the curtain at the engineering wizardry that made these death traps possible, and trust me, it's wilder than you think. You're still soaking in the view of that castle, its stones blending into the rugged hill like it grew straight out of the earth. You've felt the sting of the hills slope the river's taunt and the terrain's ruthless design. But now you're wondering, how did anyone actually build this beast? You're not just looking at a pile of stones. You're staring at a medieval engineering marvel crafted to make those heights and rivers work like a well-oiled trap. Let's slip behind the scenes and uncover the clever tricks builders used to turn a craggy hill into an untouchable fortress, making invaders wish they'd picked an easier target. You're standing at the base of the hill again, the castle's shadow stretching over you like it knows it's the boss. Building up there wasn't like stacking. Legosit was a logistical nightmare. Medieval builders didn't have cranes or trucks, just ropes, pulleys, and a whole lot of grit. The first trick, using the hill itself as a foundation. Instead of flattening the ground, they carved into the rock anchoring walls directly into the bedrock. A mainstream historical fact backs this. Castles, like Dover in England, used natural cliffs as part of their walls, saving labor and making breaches nearly impossible. You can almost see the masons sweating as they chisel away, knowing one slip could send them tumbling. But here's a quirky tidbit to make you smirk. Some builders were so crafty, they'd recycle stones from older Roman ruins, hauling them up hills like medieval upcyclers. Imagine a lord bragging about his vintage castle walls, while his workers curse the weight of those ancient blocks. Historians still argue whether this was pure pragmatism or a flex to link their castles to Rome's glory. Either way, you're starting to get it. Building high wasn't just about stacking stones. It was about outsmarting physics and enemies at the same time. Let's climb the hill and see the construction site in action. You're dodging ox carts creaking under limestone loads, the air thick with dust and the shouts of hammers. The hill's steep. Remember how attackers hated that slope. Builders did too, but they turned it into an asset. They'd cut terraces into the hillside, creating flat platforms for towers and courtyards, each level a mini fortress. These terraces weren't just practical. They confused invaders, forcing them to fight uphill through a maze of walls. You notice the walls themselves are thick, sometimes 12 feet thick, like at Crac de Chevalier in Syria, because height alone wasn't enough. The builders knew a trebuchet could still lob a boulder from the valley you saw earlier, so they sloped the base of the walls to deflect impacts like medieval shock absorbers. Now, let's talk water. You're at the top, where the castle's highest tower pierces the clouds, and you spot a well so deep it's practically flirting with that river you admired. Digging wells on high ground was no joke. Sometimes they went 200 feet down, like at Beeston Castle. Builders used hand-cranked buckets to haul out dirt, and if they hit a spring, it was like winning the medieval Powerball. That river's flow, guided by the terrain you explored, often fed these wells, keeping the castle hydrated during sieges like the one you just witnessed. And here's a quick joke. Imagine a builder covered in dirt peering into a dry well muttering, "I swear the river promised me water," while his crew rolls their eyes. But the real magic's in the details. You're noticing little tricks everywhere, like how the gatehouse perched high has a drawbridge that only works because of counterweights hidden in the walls, or how arrow slits are angled to give archers a wide shot, while staying untouchable, a geometry lesson invaders learned the hard way. Builders even use the hill's natural acoustics designing courtyards to amplify shouts so defenders could coordinate during those chaotic sieges. It's like the castles, a giant stone-built brain, every feature planned to work with the height and river you know so well. And here's another laugh picture. A mason balancing on a rickety scaffold yelling him not climbing this hill again for one more stone as his buddy drops a hammer into the void below. Building high was brutal. Workers died, tools broke, and lords often ran out of cash mid-project. But the payoff was worth it. You're seeing how every pulley, every chiseled stone, every terrace was a middle finger to the attackers floundering below. These builders weren't just stacking walls. They were crafting a fortress that used the hill's height and the river's flow as weapons. As you step back, marveling at how the castle's stones seem to pulse with ingenuity, you realize it's more than a fortress, it's a testament to human stubbornness. But this castle's not just a war machine, it's also a money machine. You're about to discover how that river you keep eyeing isn't just a defender, it's the castle's economic lifeline, keeping the gold flowing as smoothly as the water itself. You're still marveling at the castle's clever construction, those stones carved into the hill like a sculptor's masterpiece, each one a testament to medieval stubbornness and smarts. You've seen how the height, the river, the terrain, and the builder's tricks made this fortress a nightmare for invaders. But now, your gaze drifts back to that shimmering river you've been circling its waters, catching the sunlight like a promise of something more. This river isn't just a moat or a siege stopper. It's the castle's economic heartbeat pumping wealth and life into those high walls. You're about to dive into how these waterways turned castles into thriving hubs, making lords richer than a dragon hoarding gold. Picture yourself strolling along the riverbank, the castle's shadow still looming above, like it's keeping tabs on you. The water's bustling with activity barges loaded with grain timber and wool bob along their crews, shouting to be heard over the current. This river's no mere decoration, it's a medieval superhighway. Castles were often built where rivers curved or met not just for defense, but to control trade. A mainstream historical fact underscores this: castles, like those along the Rhine in Germany, taxed boats passing through, turning the river into a cash machine. You're a lord up there, sipping mead, watching your coffers fill every time a merchant sails by. Not a bad gig, right? But here's a quirky tidbit to make you grin. Some lords got so greedy, they'd chain rivers shut literally, stretching iron chains across the water to stop boats until they paid up. Think of it as a medieval toll booth, but with more chainmail and fewer orange cones. Historians still argue whether this was savvy business or just glorified piracy. Either way, you're seeing the river's power. It's not just keeping enemies out. It's bringing goods in from wine to weapons, making the castle the economic king of the valley you explored earlier. Let's get closer. You're on a barge, now gliding toward the castle's Watergate A, sneaky entrance tucked where the river kisses the walls. This isn't just for show. It's how supplies sneak in during sieges like the one you witnessed a couple of sections back. The river's your lifeline, delivering food tools, and even the occasional fancy tapestry to keep the lord's ego polished. You notice mills along the bank, their wheels churning thanks to the river's flow. These mills grind grain into flour, powering the castle's kitchens and feeding everyone from knights to scullery maids. Without the river, you're all eating moldy bread, and nobody wants that. It's like the river's, the castle's personal chef always on duty. But it's more than just food. You're watching merchants haggle at a riverside market, their stalls spilling over with goods from distant land, spices, cloth, maybe even a dodgy relic or two. The river connects the castle to trade networks, stretching hundreds of miles, linking villages to cities. You're starting to get why lords pick these spots high on hills with rivers at their feet. It's not just about surviving sieges. It's about thriving in peace. The river's a cash flow, literally and figuratively. And here's a quick joke. Imagine a merchant stuck at a river chain yelling, "I paid last week," while the lord counts his coins and pretends not to hear. Now think about the castle's people. You're wandering through the courtyard where the river's influence is everywhere. The blacksmiths hammering out swords with iron shipped upriver. The bakers kneading dough from grain milled nearby. Even the castle's latrinas, not glamorous, are flushed by channels tied to the river, keeping the stench bearable. It's a whole ecosystem, and the river's the engine. During peacetime, the castle's a hub drawing traders and travelers who pay for protection or just to gawk at those high walls you admired earlier. It's like the castle's running a medieval protection racket, and the river's the muscle making it work. But it's not all smooth sailing. You're noticing the river's moods, floods that threaten the mills, droughts that slow trade. Lords had to be sharp managing water rights and keeping rival castles downstream from hogging the flow. It's like a medieval water war, but with less splashing and more angry letters. And here's another laugh picture. A lord knee-deep in a flooded mill muttering, "This is why I should have built on a lake," while his steward tries not to giggle. As you step back, watching the river carry another barge toward the castle, you realize it's more than a moat or a mill. It's the artery that keeps this fortress alive, tying its high walls to the world below. But defense and trade aren't the whole story. Those lofty heights you've been climbing, they're about to show you their true power, not just in battles, but in making enemies tremble before they even draw a sword. You're still standing by that river, watching barges glide past their cargo, feeding the castle's wealth like a medieval Amazon delivery. The fortress looms above its high walls, practically winking at you, as if they know they're more than just a pretty pile of stones. You've seen how the hills height the river's flow, and the builder's tricks make this place a defensive beast and an economic powerhouse. But now let's climb back. Up careful on those slippery rocks, and focus on those soaring walls. Height wasn't just for show. It was a tactical flex, amplifying every defensive trick in the castle's arsenal. You're about to feel the full weight of why those lofty heights were the ultimate power move in medieval warfare. Imagine you're a defender perched on a battlement so high the clouds feel like neighbors. Down below, the valley you explored earlier is crawling with enemy-stinny specks scrambling like ants who forgot the picnic's location. The castle's height isn't just giving you a great view. It's turning you into a medieval sniper. Arrows fly farther from up here, gravity doing half the work. A mainstream historical fact drives this home. Castles, like Carcassonne in France, used their elevated positions to extend the range of their archers and catapults, making every shot a long-distance dagger. You're grinning as you loose an arrow, watching it arc down, like it's got a personal grudge against the invaders. But here's a quirky tidbit to tickle you. Some castles had murder holes above their gates openings, where defenders could drop rocks, hot sand, or even boiling porridge on attackers below. Imagine being an invader, already dizzy from climbing that hill you cursed only to get a face full of scalding oatmeal. Historians still argue whether these holes were used as often as legends claim, or if they were more for scaring enemies into rethinking their life choices. Either way, you're up there peering through a slit in the wall, feeling like a kid with a water balloon at a family reunion, except your balloon's a boulder. Let's break it down. You're on the ramparts, wind tugging at your cloak, and the heights giving you every advantage. The attackers from that siege you witnessed are struggling to set up their siege ladders too short for these towering walls thanks to the hill's boost. Your crossbow bolts hit harder because gravity's on your side, turning every shot into a physics lesson. The walls themselves, built with those clever tricks you saw last time, are sloped to deflect trebuchet stones, which roll harmlessly back down the hill you climbed. It's like the castle saying, "Nice try, but I'm too tall for your nonsense." And here's a quick joke. Picture an invader ladder wobbling, yelling, "Who designed these walls?" while you toss a rock and whisper, "Physics, buddy." Now flip to the attacker's perspective. You're down there, neck aching from staring up at those walls that seem to touch the sky. The height's not just physical, it's psychological torture. Every step up that hill, remember how steep it was, feels like a marathon, and the walls keep getting taller, like they're growing just to mock you. Your siege towers stuck in the mud by that river you cursed, and the defenders are dropping things that make you wish you'd stayed home. The castle's height amplifies every defense, from the drawbridge that's too high to ram to the gatehouse bristling with archers. It's a fortress that doesn't just fight back, it gloats, but heights also about endurance. You're back on the ramparts, watching the enemy camp in the valley below. They're running out of food, thanks to that river blocking their supply lines, just like you saw in the siege section. Your castle, high and mighty, has wells and storerooms stocked from those river barges you admired last time. You can wait them out sipping ale while they eat dirt. Castles like Harlech in Wales held out for years during sieges because their height made them hard to storm and easy to resupply. It's like playing a waiting game where you've got all the snacks and they've got nothing but complaints. And here's another laugh. Imagine an enemy commander staring up at your walls, muttering, "I told the king we needed taller ladders," while his troops slip on the hill again. The height's not just a defense, it's a statement. It tells everyone, enemies, allies, even the peasants in the valley, who's in charge. You're starting to see why lords loved their lofty castles. They weren't just safe. They were smug, daring anyone to try their luck against gravity and stone. As you lean against the cold stone of the battlement, Feeling the wind and the power of this high perch, you realize the castle's height is more than a tactus, it's a personality. But what happens when the enemy gets creative with the river? You've been circling, you're about to dive into how that water, your castle's best friend, could be turned against you in a siege, and it's a twist you didn't see coming. You're still leaning against that battlement, the wind carrying the faint echo of the river below, where barges once fueled the castles, wealth and invaders floundered in its currents. You felt the power of those lofty walls, amplifying every arrow and taunt you hurled at the enemy. But now, your eyes drift back to that river, its waters glinting like a double-edged sword. You thought it was your castle's best ally keeping attackers at bay and supplies flowing, but sieges are a dirty game, and clever enemies know how to turn your strengths against you. You're about to dive into how that river, your trusty moat, could become a weapon in the hands of a cunning besieger, making your high perch feel a little less secure. Picture yourself back on the ramparts, scanning the valley where that siege you witnessed played out. The enemy's back, and they're not just splashing around in the river like last time. They're studying it, measuring its flow, and you catch them hauling timber and ropes. They're not crossing the river, they're messing with it. Medieval sieges weren't always about storming walls. Sometimes they were about turning nature against the castle. A mainstream historical fact confirms this. During the siege of Rochester Castle in 1215, attackers tried to control nearby waterways to cut off supplies, proving rivers could be as much a liability as an asset. You're starting to sweat, wondering if that river you've been praising is about to betray you. But here's a quirky tidbit. To ease the tension, some besiegers got so desperate they'd try to poison rivers with dead animals, or even waste, hoping to sicken the castle's defenders. Imagine you're a guard sniffing the water and muttering, "This smells like last week's stew, or worse." Historians still argue whether these gross tactics worked, or if they just made the attackers look like medieval pranksters gone too far. Either way, you're up here, watching the enemy tinker with the river, and it's clear they're up to no good. The river's not just a barrier anymore. It's a battlefield. Let's get tactical. You're peering down, heart pounding, as the attackers start building a dam. They're piling logs and earth to block the river's flow, redirecting it away from your castle. That water gate you admired, where barges slipped in with supplies, it's useless if the river's diverted. Your wells, fed by the river's underground, springs might start drying up, just like that builder's nightmare. Well, you laughed about earlier. Without water, your castles, high walls won't save you. Thirst will. Or worse, they could flood the valley, turning the hill's base into a swamp, trapping your reinforcements and making your drawbridge a soggy joke. It's like the river's flipped sides, and you're not loving the plot twist. Now flip to the attacker's view. You're down there knee-deep in mud hauling logs for the dam. It's grueling, and the castle's archers perched on those high walls. You envied her taking pot shots. But you know if you can choke the river, the castle's done. You've heard stories of sieges where dams turned moats into puddles or flooded castles' lower levels, like at Bedford in 1224. The river's your leverage, a way to hit the castle where it hurts without climbing that brutal hill you cursed. And here's a quick joke. Imagine your siege commander covered in river slime, shouting, "Who knew plumbing could win a war?" while dodging an arrow. Back on the ramparts, you're scrambling. You send men to sabotage the dam, but the river's banks, those same ones that powered your mill, now a muddy trap. The enemies guarded their work, and your high vantage point doesn't help when the fight's down there. You're rationing water, cursing the river that once brought you wine and wool. The castle's height still gives you an edge. Your catapults can lob stones at the dam, but the enemies, persistent, in times not on your side. Sieges like this could drag on with both sides playing a deadly game of water control, each waiting for the other to crack. But it's not all doom. You're remembering those clever builders from a few sections back. Some castles, like those along the Loire, had secret channels to bypass diverted rivers hidden under the walls like medieval plumbing hacks. You're praying your castle's got one, because otherwise you're in for a long, thirsty wait. And here's another laugh picture, a defender staring at a dry well muttering, "I knew we should have trusted that rainwater barrel," while his buddy chugs the last ale. As you watch the rivers flow, weaken the castles, stones feel colder under your hands. The heights still your strength, but the river's a wild card, and the enemy's playing it well. This fortress, built to master its surroundings, is now fighting to keep its lifeline. But there's more to those high walls than defense. They're a symbol, a flex that echoes beyond the battlefield. You're about to see how this castle's lofty perch screams power, not just to invaders, but to everyone in the valley below. You're still gripping the cold stone of the battlement, the river below. Now a tricky ally after that tense moment, watching enemies toy with its flow. The castle's height saved you, giving your catapults the range to smash their dam, but the scare lingers like a bad dream. You've seen this fortress as a war machine, a trade hub, and a feat of engineering, all thanks to its lofty perch and watery embrace. But now shift your gaze across the valley, where villages huddle under the castle's shadow. Those high walls aren't just for defense or profit. They're a giant billboard, screaming power, telling everyone from peasants to rival lords who's running the show. You're about to feel why these sky-high castles were built to dominate more than just battlefields. Picture yourself as a villager, toiling in the fields below your neck, sore from glancing up at the castle's turrets piercing the clouds. It's not just a building. It's a constant reminder of who's in charge. Medieval castles were designed to project authority, their height making them visible for miles like a medieval bat signal. A mainstream historical fact backs this: castles, like Windsor in England, were built high to dominate the landscape, ensuring every traveler, farmer, or wannabe rebel knew the Lord's eyes were always watching. You're out here plowing your field, and the castle's glare feels like it's judging your crop yield. But here's a quirky tidbit to make you chuckle: some lords went overboard, building towers so tall they swayed in storms just to outdo their neighbors. Think of it as a medieval skyscraper race, except with more stone and fewer safety codes. Castles, like the Tower of London, had turrets that screamed, "I'm richer than you." Historians still argue whether these mega towers were pure ego or a legit way to intimidate rivals. Either way, you're down in the village, and that castle's height isn't just impressive, it's oppressive, making you think twice about skipping your taxes. Let's climb back up to the castle's ramparts for a lord's eye view. You're standing tall, wind whipping your cloak, surveying the valley like you own it, because, well, you kind of do. The height gives you control, not just over invaders, but over everyone below. Villages pay you tribute, merchants beg for your protection, and even distant lords think twice before crossing you. The castle's perch, paired with that river you've been circling, lets you tax trade routes and monitor roads like a medieval traffic cam with teeth. You're not just defending a fortress, you're running an empire from up here, and the height makes it all possible. Now think about the message. You're a rival lord, riding through the valley, and you spot this castle, its walls soaring above the hill you cursed climbing earlier. It's not just talents, loud shouting, "Don't even try it." The heights, a psychological weapon, making you question your army's morale before you even unpack your siege gear. Castles like Stowe Guy Yard, perched on its cliff, were built to look invincible, discouraging attacks before they started. And here's a quick joke. Imagine you, the rival, muttering, "Who needs a castle that high?" overcompensating much while your knights snicker behind you. But it's not all intimidation. You're back in the castle hosting a feast in the great hall, the river's barges having delivered wine and spices just in time. Your guest nobles, bishops, maybe a shady troubadour gawk at the view from your high windows, the valley sprawling below like your personal chessboard. The heights of flex showing off your wealth and security. You're serving peacock and boasting about your impregnable walls built with those engineering tricks you admired earlier. It's like hosting a medieval TED Talk, and the castle's altitude is your PowerPoint slide proving you're untouchable. Yet there's a flip side. You're noticing the villagers' wary glances when they bring their grain to your gates. The castle's height isolates you, making you seem distant, literally and figuratively. Some lords leaned into this, using their lofty perch to seem godlike while others struggled to keep local loyalty. It's a balancing act, and the river helps tying you to the valley's economy like you saw last time. But the height, it's a double-edged sword, amplifying your power, but also your solitude. And here's another laugh picture, a lord tripping on his cloak, while posing dramatically on the ramparts, muttering, "This view better be worth it," as his squire pretends not to notice. As you lean against the battlement, the valley's lights flickering below, you realize this castle's height is more than strategy or trade. It's a symbol, a crown of stone that rules the land. But the river's role doesn't end with defense or gold. You're about to wade into how it keeps the castles, people alive day after day, turning this high fortress into a living, breathing community. You're still on those lofty ramparts, the valley's twinkling lights below, reminding you of the castle's commanding presence, its height shouting power to every soul in sight. The river, winding through the scene like a silver thread, has been your constant companion, guarding trading and occasionally betraying you with its fickle flow. You've seen it as a moat, a trade route, and a siege weapon, but now it's time to slip inside the castle's walls where the river's daily gifts keep this stone giant alive. You're about to wander through the bustling courtyards and smoky kitchens, discovering how river valleys turn these high fortresses into thriving communities, not just fortresses for fighting or flaunting. Picture yourself ducking through a low stone archway, the castle's hustle hitting you like a wave. Servants haul buckets, cooks shout over sizzling pots, and a stray chicken flaps past medieval chaos at its finest. The river's influence is everywhere. Those barges you watched gliding in last time, they've unloaded barrels of fish, sacks of grain, and casks of wine all hauled up that steep hill you climbed ages ago. The river valleys, the castle's pantry, feeding everyone from the lord to the lowliest stable hand. A mainstream historical fact drives this home castles, like those along the Danube, relied on river valleys for fertile fields and fishing, ensuring food security even during tense times. You're sniffing fresh bread, and it's all thanks to the river's bounty. But here's a quirky tidbit to make you smile. Some castles had fish ponds stocked directly from the river, with monks or servants playing fish keeper to breed carp for fancy feasts. Imagine a grumpy monk, nets in hand, muttering about sacred carp, while the lord demands a bigger catch for dinner. Historians still argue whether these ponds were practical or just a status symbol for lords obsessed with fishy flexes. Either way, you're strolling through the castle's kitchen, where the river's gifts are being gutted, baked, and boiled, keeping bellies full and spirits high. Let's explore the courtyard. You're dodging a cart piled with firewood cut from valley forests and floated upriver on rafts. The river's not just feeding the castle, it's heating it, powering forges, and even flushing the latrines. Trust me, you're glad for that. You spot a miller trudging in his apron, dusted with flour from the river-powered mill you saw earlier. That mill's grinding grain from valley fields, fertile from the river's silt deposits. It's a cycle. The river irrigates, crops, powers mills, and delivers the goods, all while the castle's height keeps it safe to enjoy the spoils. You're starting to see this place as a living organism, not just a pile of stones. Now, picture daily life. You're weaving through the castle's crowded alleys where blacksmiths hammer iron shipped upriver and weavers spin wool from valley sheep. The river valley's a resource hub, supplying everything from clay for pots to reeds for baskets. It's like the castle's running a medieval Walmart with the river as its delivery truck. Without it, you'd be chewing stale oats and wearing threadbare tunics. And here's a quick joke. Imagine a cook juggling fish from the river yelling, "If this carp flops one more time, I'm joining the siege outside while the kitchen cat steals a fillet." But it's not just about stuff. You're noticing the people, hundreds of them, from knights to washerwomen, all tied to the river. The valley's villages nestled along its banks send workers to the castle, their taxes and labor keeping it running. The river's a social glue linking the high fortress to the lowlands. You're watching kids play near a well, its water drawn from a spring fed by the rivers underground. Flow just like those wells you marveled at during construction. It's a reminder the river's not just a moat or a trade route. It's the castle's pulse keeping everyone alive. Yet there's a catch. You're seeing the river's moods again. Floods that swamp the valleys. Crops droughts that slow the mills. The castle's height helps keeping it above floodwaters. But you're still at the river's mercy. Some lords built dikes or channels, like those clever builders you met to control the flow. It's a constant dance balancing the river's gifts with its tantrums. And here's another laugh picture. A steward drenched from a flood muttering, "Next time, I'm building a raft while hauling soggy grain to the castle." As you pause in the courtyard, the river's hum in the distance, you realize this castle's more than a fortress or a symbol. It's a community sustained by the valley's lifeblood. But the world's changing, and those high walls you've been climbing, they're about to face new threats, ones that even height and rivers might not stop. You're ready to see how this castle faces an evolving battlefield where old tricks meet new dangers. You're lingering in the castle's bustling courtyard, the hum of daily life, clanging forges, chattering servants, and that faint river gurgle still ringing in your ears. The river's been your lifeline, feeding and sustaining this high fortress, while its lofty perch scream power over the valley you've come to know. But now, the air feels heavier, charged with the distant rumble of something new. The medieval world's shifting, and those towering walls, built to defy arrows and rams, are facing threats no one saw coming. You're about to step into a time when new weapons and tactics challenge the castle's height and river testing, whether this stone giant can keep its crown in a changing battlefield. Picture yourself back on the ramparts, the wind sharper now as you squint at the horizon. The valleys, the same river-glinting villages huddled below, But there's a new menace out there. Siege technology's evolving, and it's not just ladders and catapults anymore. Gunpowder's creeping in a game changer that laughs at your high walls. Cannons, crude but brutal, are rolling up their iron mouths ready to spit fire. A mainstream historical fact anchors this. By the late 1400s, castles like Constantinople's mighty walls fell to Ottoman cannons, proving even the highest fortresses weren't untouchable anymore. You're gripping the stone, wondering if your castle's height is enough against this new beast. But here's a quirky tidbit. To lighten the mood early, cannons were so unreliable they'd sometimes explode, taking out their own gunners before your archers could. Imagine you're a defender watching an enemy cannon backfire and muttering, "Nice shot, genius," while your mates cheer. Historians still argue whether gunpowder ended the age of castles or just forced them to adapt. Some say low, thick-walled forts replaced high castles, while others insist old-school designs held on. Either way, you're up here, and the cannon's distant boom is a wake-up call that your hilltop advantage might not be invincible. Let's dive into the chaos. You're scanning the valley, where the enemy's setting up a cannon battery near the river you've relied on. Those high walls built with the clever tricks you admired were great against trebuchets, but cannons don't care about your sloped bases or lofty towers. A single shot could crack a wall, turning your height into a liability. Falling stones are no joke when you're this high up. The river, your old friend, isn't much help either. Cannons can fire from across its banks, safe from the currents that stopped older sieges. You're rethinking that dam scare from earlier. A diverted river feels like a minor headache compared to this. Now flip to the attacker's side. You're down there wrestling a cannon through the muddy valley you cursed climbing. It's heavy, it's finicky, and the castle's archers, still deadly from that height you envied, are picking off your crew. But you know one good hit could breach the gatehouse, letting you bypass the hill's defenses. Gunpowder's your trump card, leveling the playing field against the castle's altitude. You're aiming at the walls, hoping to avoid blowing yourself up first. And here's a quick joke. Picture your gunner wiping soot off his face, muttering, "This cannon better work, or I'm back to throwing rocks," while the castle looms above, unimpressed. Back on the ramparts, you're adapting. You're piling earth behind the walls, a trick some castles use to absorb cannon shots like medieval sandbags. You're also leaning on your heights, old tricks. Your archers can still outrange the enemy, and the river's muddy banks slow their cannon carts just like they stalled siege towers in that siege you witnessed. But it's a race against time. Cannons are slow to load, but each hit chips away at your confidence. You're praying those builders you praised thought ahead, maybe adding extra thick walls, like at Bodiam Castle, designed with gunpowder in mind. The river's still in play, though. You're noticing how its flow complicates things for the attackers. Their cannons need dry ground, but the valley's soggy from spring floods. A leftover gift from the rivers, moods you chuckled about. You're sending raiders to harass their supply lines, using the river's bends for cover, just like those barges you saw delivering goods. It's a reminder height and water still give you an edge, even against this new threat. And here's another laugh. Imagine a cannon crew stuck in mud yelling, "Who put a river here?" while you lob a stone from above grinning. As you watch the enemy struggle, the castle stone still solid under your feet, you realize it's not over yet. Height and rivers are adapting, forcing attackers to rethink their shiny new toys. But the game's changing fast, and this castle's not just fighting for survival, it's fighting to stay relevant. You're about to explore how the river beyond battles and trade shaped the castle's alliances and enemies, weaving a web of diplomacy as murky as its waters. You're still gripping the ramparts, the echo of cannon fire fading as the enemy's latest attack stalls, their cannons bogged down by the river's muddy banks. You've come to appreciate the castle's height and that tricky water have bought you time. But the threat of gunpowder lingers like smoke in the air. You've seen this fortress weather sieges, fuel trade, and sustain a community, all while towering over the valley. But now, your eyes trace the river's winding path beyond the battlefield, where it connects not just villages, but entire realms. This river's not just a defender or a provider, it's a diplomatic chessboard shaping alliances and conflicts as lords and kings vie for its control. You're about to navigate the murky waters of medieval politics, where this castle's flow decides friends and foes. Picture yourself in the Lord's solar high in the castles. Keep a map of the river valley spread before you. The rivers, not just the moat you relied on, or the trade route that filled your coffer sets, a political lifeline tying your fortress to distant powers. Castles were built along rivers to control key waterways, making them diplomatic hotspots where treaties were signed or broken. A mainstream historical fact backs this: castles, like those along the Loire River in France, hosted peace talks and royal summits, their strategic river locations making them neutral ground or battlegrounds for diplomacy. You're sipping wine, with a rival eyeing the river outside, wondering if they're here to ally or spy. But here's a quirky tidbit to make you grin. Some lords used river barges, like the ones you admire, for secret diplomatic missions, sneaking envoys past enemy castles under cover of night. Imagine a barge cloaked in fog with a nervous diplomat whispering, "If we get caught, aim," blaming the rower while dodging patrols. Historians still argue whether these covert river trips were common or just rare acts of medieval Mission Impossible. Either way, you're in your high tower, and the river's flow is a constant reminder that power isn't just in wall sits, in connections too. Let's get strategic. You're hosting a rival lord, their banners flapping outside your gatehouse, brought up by that river you've circled since the start. The river's a shared resource, and controlling it, like taxing those barges you saw, or building mills, gives you leverage. You're offering a deal: safe passage for their boats in exchange for troops against a common foe. But rivers breed tension too. Downstream castles could dam the flow, like that siege trick you flinched at cutting your trade or water. Or upstream lords might demand a cut of your river tolls, claiming the water's theirs. It's a high-stakes poker game with the river as the pot, and your castle's view gives you an edge in reading the players. Now flip to an envoy's perspective. You're gliding down the river toward the castle, its high towers looming like they're sizing you up. The Lord's reputation precedes them. Those walls that river that hill you cursed climbing, they're not just defenses, they're diplomatic muscle. You're here to negotiate peace, but the castle's height screams, "We don't need you." The rivers bend where their mills churn, reminds you they control the valley's wealth. You're treading carefully, knowing one wrong word could spark a feud, worse a blockade. And here's a quick joke. Picture you, the envoy, muttering, "I'd rather face their cannons than their paperwork," while the Lord smirks across the table. Back in the solar, you're weighing your options. The river's a double-edged sword. It brings allies like those wine-laden barges you savored, but also enemies who use its flow to scout your defenses. You're sending gifts downstream, maybe wool from your valley sheep to keep a neighbor sweet, but you're also fortifying your water gate, remembering how rivers can be siege weapons too. Castles like those on the Rhine were diplomatic hubs, hosting kings and popes, but also flashpoints for wars over river rights. It's a tightrope, and your castle's height gives you the view to walk it barely. But diplomacy's not all smooth. You're noticing the rivers, moods again, floods that disrupt trade talks, droughts that spark disputes over water shares. Rival lords downstream might accuse you of hogging the flow. Like that miller you laughed at wading through a flood. You're sending envoys to smooth things over, but the river's a shared vein, and everyone wants a bigger cut. And here's another laugh. Imagine a lord, mid-negotiation, spilling wine on the map and joking, "That's my new river border," while their rival glares. As you roll up the map, the river's glint outside reminds you this castle's more than a fortress or trade. Hubit's a player in a bigger game, its height and water-shaping kingdoms. But power's not just politics or cannons, it's fear too. You're about to feel how this lofty perch terrifies enemies before they even draw a sword, turning height into a weapon sharper than steel. You're still in the King's Solar, the map of the river valley, tucked away its lines lingering in your mind like the diplomatic tightrope you've just walked. The river's flow outside reminds you of its role in trade routes, sieges, and now campaigns, while the castle's height looms over it all, a silent force in every conquest. But now, step back onto the ramparts, where the wind carries a sharper edge, and imagine an enemy army gathering in the valley below. Before they even raise a sword, this castle's towering presence is already working its magic, sowing fear in their hearts. You're about to feel how the psychological edge of height turned these fortresses into mind games, making invaders quake long before the first arrow flies. Picture yourself as an invader camped in the shadow of the castle's hill, your neck craned to take in its walls, piercing the clouds. The fortress doesn't just look tall, it feels alive, like it's glaring down, daring you to try something stupid. Medieval castles were built high, not just for defense, but to mess with your head. Their altitude, a silent threat that screamed, "You're already losing." A mainstream historical fact backs this. Castles like Mont Saint-Michel in France used their dizzying heights to demoralize attackers who often hesitated before even starting a siege. You're out here, your campfire flickering, and the castle's silhouette feels like it's laughing at your courage. But here's a quirky tidbit to ease the tension. Some kings leaned into the spooky vibes, spreading rumors of ghosts or curses haunting their high towers to scare superstitious soldiers. Imagine you're a foot soldier, hearing whispers about a spectral knight patrolling the ramparts and thinking, "I didn't sign up for this." Historians still argue whether these tales were deliberate psyops or just local folklore that kings happily exploited. Either way, you're down in the valley, and the castle's height isn't just a physical barrier, it's a mental one, making your knees wobble before you even unpack your siege gear. Let's climb back to the defender's perch. You're on the ramparts, the wind stinging your face, and you're grinning, because you know the enemy's sweating just looking at you. The castle's height amplifies every move you make. You wave a banner, and it looks like a taunt from the gods. You light a torch, and it's a beacon of defiance visible for miles. The hill, you've climbed the river, you've circled. They all add to the effect, making the castle seem untouchable. You're not just defending a fortress, you're starring in a medieval horror show, and the invaders are the audience already spooked. It's like those murder holes you chuckled about, but the weapon's fear itself. Now back to the attacker's camp. You're huddled with your mates trying to psych yourself up, but the castle's height is relentless. Every glint of armor up there, those archers you cursed during the siege section, feels like a personal threat. The hills slope, the rivers churn the walls. Sheer scale, they're all screaming, "Go home." Some castles, like Crac des Chevaliers, were so imposing that enemies negotiated surrender just to avoid the climb. You're starting to wonder if your commander's lost his mind, ordering you to storm that. And here's a quick joke picture, you staring up, muttering, "I bet the kings," just sitting there eating pie, while the castle looms smug as ever. The psychological edge isn't just about scaring the enemy, it's about control. You're back on the ramparts, watching the enemy hesitate. Their delay buys you time to reinforce the gatehouse stock supplies from the river barges you admired, or send for allies like those envoys you sent gliding downstream. The castle's height makes you bold, letting you project confidence even when you're low on arrows. You're shouting taunts, knowing the valley's acoustics, those builder tricks you loved, carry your voice to every invader. It's a mind game when you're winning, because up here you feel like you own the sky while they're stuck in the dirt. But it's not all one-sided. You're noticing the enemies trying to rally, maybe building a trebuchet to lob stones at your high walls, like the cannons you dodged last time. They're fighting their fear, and you respect the effort even if it's doomed. The river's still your ally. Its muddy banks, slowing their work, just like it stalled those cannon carts. You're leaning on the castle's height to keep them rattled, but you're praying your reputation holds. Some castles lost their edge when enemies got bold, like when gunpowder shook things up, and you're hoping your lofty perch keeps its mojo. And here's another laugh. Imagine an invader packing up camp, muttering, "I'm not dying for a view I can't reach," as his mates nod, already halfway home. The castle's height isn't just a defense or a symbol, it's a weapon that strikes before the battle begins, turning every glance upward into a blow to morale. As you lean against the battlement, the valley's shadows deepening, you realize this fortress's true power lies in its ability to terrify. But the river's got more secrets beyond fear or trade. You're about to uncover its other defenses, hidden tricks that make this castle even harder to crack. You're still perched on the ramparts, the castle's height, making you feel like you're ruling the sky, while the river below weaves its spell of fear and defiance over the valley you've watched tremble. The psychological edge of those towering walls, paired with the river's relentless flow, has kept enemies at bay before they could even swing a sword. But now your gaze lingers on the water's glint where it curls around the castle like a protective arm. You've seen the river as a moat, a trade route, a siege weapon, and a diplomatic tool, but it's got more tricks up its sleeve. You're about to dive into the hidden defenses beyond the obvious moat that rivers lent to these fortresses, turning them into puzzles even the boldest invaders couldn't solve. Picture yourself patrolling the castle's lower walls, where the river kisses the stone, its current murmuring secrets only the defenders know. The river's not just a barrier like you saw stopping invaders in that early siege, but a network of clever defenses woven into the castle's design. Beyond the moat, builders crafted hidden channels, floodgates, and even traps to make the water a silent soldier. A mainstream historical fact anchors this castle's, like Caerphilly in Wales, used complex water systems with artificial lakes and sluices to flood surrounding lands during attacks, turning fields into swamps. You're down here checking a concealed grate, knowing the river's ready to fight for you. But here's a quirky tidbit to make you smirk. Some castles had secret water traps, like hidden pipes that could douse invaders with a sudden deluge from the river. Imagine an attacker already soaked from crossing that river. You cursed, getting hit with a surprise wave and yelling, "This is not what I signed up for." Historians still argue whether these aquatic ambushes were common or just rare strokes of genius by paranoid lords. Either way, you're inspecting the castle's water gate and the river's not just a pretty view, it's a loaded weapon waiting to be unleashed. Let's explore the setup. You're at the water gate, that sneaky entrance you spotted where barges slipped in supplies. It's not just for trade. It's rigged with defenses. Hidden channels carved by those clever builders you admired can divert river water to flood the approach, turning the hill's base into a muddy trap. You're picturing the invaders from that siege, their ladders useless in a sudden swamp, their boots sinking like they're in quicksand. Some castles, like those along the Rhine, had sluices that could release water in controlled bursts, washing away siege works or drowning campfires. It's like the river's your bouncer, and you just gave it the signal to clear the room. Now flip to the attacker's perspective. You're back in the valley. Your army's morale already shaky from the castle's terrifying height you felt last time. You're trying to build a siege ramp, but the river's banks, those same ones that slowed your cannons, are now suspiciously wetter. The defenders have opened a sluice, and water's creeping up, turning your camp into a bog. Your men are slipping your trebuchets, tilting, and you're cursing the river that's supposed to be your ally. You've heard of castles like Bodiam, where moats were fed by multiple streams, making it impossible to dry them out. And here's a quick joke. Picture you, the commander, shouting, "Who forgot the rain boots?" as your siege tower sinks into the mud. Back inside, you're at a control room, okay, more like a damp stone chamber where levers and gates manage the river's flow. You're pulling a lever, and somewhere below a channel opens, sending water rushing to block the enemy's path. It's not just brute force. It's precision, thanks to the terrain you explored, which funnels the river exactly where you need it. The castle's height helps too. Your high vantage lets you spot the enemy's moves and time the water's release. It's like playing a medieval video game, except the stakes are real and your controller's a rusty crank. But it's not foolproof. You're noticing the river's moods, again like those floods that swamp the valley's crops. A clever enemy might try to block your channels, like they tried damming the river in that siege scare. You're double-checking the grates, praying the builders' tricks hold up. Some castles had backup wells, like the deep one you laughed about to survive a cutoff. You're hoping yours does, because without the river's defenses, your high walls might not be enough. And here's another laugh. Imagine a defender cranking a stuck gate, muttering, "This river better not clock out now," while water trickles instead of gushes. As you stand by the water gate, the river's steady flow a quiet promise. You realize it's more than a moat or a mill, it's a defender as cunning as the castle itself. But this fortress's story isn't just about battles or tricks. You're about to reflect on why these high castles with their rivers and ramparts linger in our minds, their legacy echoing long after the last siege. You're still by the water gate, the river's quiet flow, a steady whisper, its hidden channels and traps fresh in your mind as the castle's final line of defense. The high walls above, carved into the hill you've climbed, have stood firm through sieges, trade booms, and diplomatic dances, all tied to the river's embrace. But now, as the sun dips low, casting long shadows over the valley, you've come to know it's time to step back and reflect. Why do these lofty castles, perched high and cradled by rivers, still grip our imaginations centuries later? You're about to wander through their legacy, unraveling why these stone giants endure in stories, dreams, and the misty corners of history. Picture yourself on the highest tower, the wind softer now, carrying the scent of the river and the distant hum of village life below. The castle's height which you've seen, terrify invaders, command trade, and flex power feels timeless up here, like it's etched into the sky itself. Medieval castles weren't just fortresses. They were symbols of human ambition, defiance, and ingenuity built to outlast their makers. A mainstream historical fact anchors this castles like Neuschwanstein in Germany, though later inspired fairy tales and films, their high perches and river settings fueling myths that keep them alive. You're gazing out, feeling the weight of centuries in the stones under your hands. But here's a quirky tidbit to make you smile. Some castles became tourist traps even in medieval times, with pilgrims or travelers gawking at their towers like you did at the start. Imagine a monk guidebook in hand, muttering, "This hill's steeper than the sermons," while sketching the castle for his abbey's records. Historians still argue whether these early tourists saw castles as sacred relics or just bragging rights for their lords. Either way, you're up here, and the castle's legacy isn't just in battles or trade, it's in the stories it inspires, from knights to dragons, that still spark your dreams. Let's take a final walk. You're descending the tower, each step echoing through the keep, past the great hall where you imagined feasts fueled by river barges. The castle's height gave it strength, but its legacy lies in what it stood for: safety in a chaotic world, power over sprawling valleys, and a stubborn refusal to fall. You're thinking of castles like Edinburgh, perched on its crag, still drawing crowds who marvel at its defiance. Their rivers, those lifelines you've circled, kept them fed, feared, and connected, weaving them into the fabric of history. It's not just stone. It's a story that's outlived swords and cannons, even those gunpowder threats you dodged. Now picture the valley below, where villagers once toiled under the castle's gaze like you saw when it screamed power. Today, those villages might be towns, the river still flowing, but the castle's shadow lingers in local tales. You're imagining kids by the riverbank, swapping stories of ghostly nights, maybe those rumors you chuckled about, keeping the castle's fear factor alive. The height that crushed enemy morale now lifts spirits, drawing artists, writers, and dreamers who see romance in its ruins. It's like the castle's traded its chainmail for a storyteller's cloak, still commanding attention from its hilltop throne. But why do we care? You're pausing in the courtyard, the river's mills, silent now, their wheels a memory of the life you glimpsed. Castles endure because their use our fears, our ambitions, our need to build something lasting. The river's flow, which powered mills and foiled sieges, mirrors our own drive to adapt, to thrive against the odds. You're thinking of how castles evolved, like when cannons forced thicker walls, a nod to the resilience you felt facing new threats. And here's a quick joke. Imagine a modern tourist panting up the hill, muttering, "This better be worth the cardio," while the castle smirks unchanged. The legacy's not just romantic, though. You're reflecting on the cost those builders you admired, hauling stones up cliffs, or the villagers taxed to fund it all. The castle's height isolated lords, like you sensed in its diplomatic games, but also united communities, tying them to the river's bounty. It's a paradox, a fortress of solitude and a hub of life, its story as complex as the terrain you explored. You're wondering If today's skyscrapers piercing clouds like these towers carry the same weight, or if our rivers now dammed and tamed still hold such power. As you reach the gatehouse, the river's glint catches your eye one last time. The castle's legacy is its endurance, not just in stone, but in memory, its height and water, weaving a tale that's outlasted empires. You're ready to leave, but the fortress feels alive, its story whispering through the valley, ready for the next dreamer to climb its hill. Now let the castle fade a little, its high towers softening in the twilight, the river's murmur growing faint like a lullaby winding down. You're easing away from the ramparts, the valley's lights blurring into a gentle glow, each one a memory of the stories you've walked through tonight. The stones, the water, the battles. They're slipping into the mist, leaving only a quiet sense of wonder. You're safe now. No sieges to fight, no rivers to ford, just the soft hum of your own breath, steady as that river's flow. Picture the castle, one last time, its silhouette against the stars whispering that it stood for centuries and will stand a little longer in your dreams. Let the weight of the day lift the hills climb, forgotten, the valleys, shadows fading. You're drifting, carried by the river's current toward a sleep as deep as those ancient wells. Rest now. Let the castle keep watch, its legacy yours to hold until morning.